This is a story of Jack and the haunted house. Now Jack, he lived on the edge of a small town, way out in farmland country. And he went to the school, and he had lots of friends from growing up there. His dad had died when he was a small boy, and his mother raised him. He was a big, strong boy, and when he got to be grown enough to, sort of take care of himself, he turned to his mom and he said, "Mom, I'm big enough now. It's time I went out into the world and sought my fortune. I'm going to go down the big road, and I'm going to get rich." Well, his mother heard him say that, and truth be told, she was having a hard time putting enough food on the table to fill him up because he was growing really strong, and he was pretty much a grown fella. He said, "Now don't you worry, Mom. As soon as I'm rich, I'll send for you, and you can come live with me." And she felt a lot better hearing that because, she didn't want him to just be gone and never come back. And so she said, "Okay, son, come on here in the kitchen." And he went in the kitchen there in the little house they lived in at the end of that long lane way back from the road. She opened up the cupboards and she took down all the food they had, all the food they had in the kitchen cupboard didn't cover the top of the kitchen table. Times were kind of hard. She separated the food into two piles, one for her, one for Jack. She put her food back in the cupboard. She opened the drawer and took out a cloth sack, because when she bought flour, she bought it in a big cloth sack so she could make bread and things like that. And she put Jack's food into that sack. It's about the size of a small pillowcase. She handed the sack to Jack. He threw the sack over his shoulder, tipped his hat, and said, "Yep, Mom, don't worry. I'll send for you as soon as I'm rich." And he waved and he headed down the lane out to the big road, and she waved goodbye. He got out there to the big road, and he walked down the road. That whole day he didn't see anybody. That's how kind of far back in the country they lived. At the end of the day, well, it was a nice afternoon. He found a soft patch of grass. He had some food from that sack, rolled it up into a pillow, and he went to sleep. It was nice sleeping outside, The bugs weren't bad. And woke up the next morning, he stretched, he got up and had some more food. He headed off down the road. Second day passed just like the first did. He didn't see anybody. That's how far back in civilization they were. And this second evening, he came to another patch of grass, had some more food. That night passed the same way. Third day started. At the end of the third day, he traveled far enough to where there wasn't grass around anymore. The ground was just dirt with rocks sticking out of it. And he went to have something, but the sack was empty. So he lay down and he got as much sleep as he could. It wasn't very comfortable sleeping on that hard ground with those rocks poking him. Fourth day began like the others had. He didn't see anybody. He's just walking down the road. That sack. Halfway through the fourth day, the sky clouded up real quick like, and the storm blew in and started raining. Pretty soon the rain soaked his clothes. He pulled his hat down and took his collar up. He's walking along, slosh, slosh, slosh. His socks are going in his shoes. His underwear was getting wet from the rain dripping down his back. Toward the end of the afternoon, he came to a crossroads. And in the gloom, with the storm and all, through the rain, he could see there was a big building off to one side. He went close enough, and he could see above the door, it said, "Inn with two N's." A place where people stay. Maybe somebody will let me come in and dry off and have a bite to eat. I'll trade him some work. I'll clean up or whatever, just to have a place to stay and something to eat. And he went over to the door. Boom, 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 boom. He knocked on it. The door swung open, and there was a big, jolly innkeeper. Yeah. "Hello there, young fella. How you doing?" "Not so good, sir. I'm just looking for a place to stay. I'd be happy to swap you a little work. I can do just about anything around a place like this if you'd let me come in and dry off by your fire and give me something to eat and a place to stay tonight." "Well, I don't know about that. What's your name and what's your business?" "My name is Jack, sir. I'm from 4 days' walk up the big road. I'm in the world seeking my fortune. I'm going to get rich." "Well, is that so, Jack?" "Well, if that's the way it is, you don't want to come stay with me. No, sirree. You want to stay over yonder ways." The innkeeper pointed back over Jack's shoulder. Jack looked back over his shoulder where the innkeeper was pointing, and there, on the opposite side of the road, Jack had noticed up on a hill was a big old house. Big old house with a porch that went all the way across the second story. Must have been 8 or 10 or 12 rooms anyway in that house. The innkeeper said, "The governor says anybody go and stay in that big old house over there overnight can have it and all the land around it, a few hundred acres anyway, for their very own. Well, Jack liked the idea of that big old house with lots of land. Yes, sir. Well, I'm going to go stay in that house. Just tell me one thing, he told the innkeeper. What's the catch? Oh, ain't no catch to it, said the innkeeper. Said, folks around here, they claim that old house is haunted, but you ain't afraid of a little old ghost. Are you, Jack? No, sir. I'll get that place from very own. Jack was kind of wondering what he's getting himself into. Well, that's mighty nice to hear, Jack, said the innkeeper. And the innkeeper stepped back inside the door. Now, the innkeeper was a big fellow. He just about filled up that door. As the innkeeper stepped back in, Jack could see the door he knocked on went into the sort of kitchen of the inn. There was a big old fireplace off to one side, big old table, pots and pans hanging around. The innkeeper walked over to a rack with hooks, and he took down a dipper. And he took down a bucket. And he walked over, nice sized bucket. He walked over to a big pot cooking on a hook in the fire. He took the lid off of that pot. Oh, Jack's stomach started doing cartwheels. Because what he could smell had been cooking in that pot was stew with yummy, delicious things in it. And the dipper, he dipped out 7 dipperfuls of stew into that bucket. Put the dipper aside, put the lid back on the pot, set the bucket aside, reached down into the coals underneath the big pot cooking on the fire, took out a great big heavy black cast iron skillet. There was a lid on top of that skillet, and the innkeeper set the skillet on a chopping block, took the lid off the skillet, and Jack could see and smell in that skillet was cornbread, soft and moist like cake. His mouth was starting to water. The innkeeper sliced out a big chunk of cornbread, reached over, and there was a big bowl with butter in it. Took some butter, put it on the cornbread. There was a big kind of a cup with honey in it. Took some honey, put it on top of the cornbread. Put the cornbread on top of the stew in the bucket. Stepped over to the door. Here you are, Jack. Something to warm you up. Well, that's mighty neighborly of you, said Jack. Thanks a lot. I'll see you in the morning. I hope, said Jack. And the innkeeper shut the door. It was almost dark, but there was enough light Jack could see in the gloom and the rain. There was a lane, kind of a driveway, just muddy. He slipped and slid up to the big house on the hill. He got up to the porch and he wiped as much mud as he could off on the front edges of the steps, walked up on the porch, walked up to the front door, kind of looked at it, saw a window, walked over to the window, looked through the window. It was gloomy and the glass was dirty. He took his coat sleeve and he rubbed the dirt off the glass, looked inside. It was too gloomy to see much. He went back to the door and he noticed the door was solid wood and there were figures carved into it. There was a bird flying in the sky and there were trees and trout jumping out of a stream and a deer jumping over the stream. And in the middle of the door was a big brass knocker. Down to the side was a crystal glass doorknob. Jack reached up and he grabbed hold of the knocker. Boom, boom, boom. He banged on the door and he heard the echo of the banging die down inside. What am I doing? He said to himself. Nobody lives here. I just let myself in. He reached down and he grabbed hold of that doorknob and he turned it. Touching it made him jump kind of sudden because it was cold as a gravestone. But he had to turn the latch. The door was loose, so he leaned back and he nudged the door with the toe of his shoe. The hinges squeaked as the door squeaked open. He looked inside. At first it was too dark to see, but his eyes adjusted and he kind of felt his way along the entryway wall. There was a little sitting table where you could take off your boots. He went around that. There was a big old kind of a tall bucket with umbrellas in it. And pretty soon he could kind of make his way. He could see there was a chandelier up there, a small one to light the entryway. There was a doorway off the entry hall, and it went into a big room. There in that room, you could see in the little bit of light coming in through the window of the door, there was a couch and some chairs and tables. There was a fireplace along the back wall. Well, he made his way around to the fireplace, put his bucket of food down, felt around on the mantel, found some matches, felt around off the side, found a wood box, found some kindling. So he set up and made a nice fire in the fireplace. And he went back and he shut the door, put some more wood on the fire. He was starting to dry off. His food had gotten kind of cold. He'd been kind of leaning over trying to keep the rain out of it coming up the hill. And he wanted his food to be hot. So he set the bucket of food down by the fire. And he was standing there getting drier and warmer, thinking about, I'm going to get my friends to come over here. We're going to get together, tell stories, and have parties and stuff. Yes, indeed. Boy, I'm going to like living here, thought Jack. And then kind of creepy like, the room and the house and the whole world seemed to get real still and quiet. Out of that quiet, a voice came down the chimney right in front of Jack and said, I'm gonna fall. I'm gonna fall. While he looked at the fireplace, down the chimney, boom, boom, came two big, hairy, grubby, grimy legs. With humongous feet, with gargantuan toes, with huge gobs of toe jams in between them. And while Jack watched those legs, stepped out of the fireplace, boom, boom, and stood right next to him. He looked at him and he said, don't you step in my stew. The legs didn't say a word. They just jumped up and down. They shook all the ashes and soot from the chimney off. And then the legs walked across the room. Boom, 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 boom. Until they came to the rocking chair in the corner. When they got to the rocking chair, the legs put the backside toward the chair, kind of bent at the knees. And the rocking chair started rocking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Ooh. Visitors. Jack thought. Well, he kept the rocking chair sort of in the corner of his eye, and the fire had fallen down on one side because fires do that some, so he took the fireplace tools and put the fire back up, got some more wood and kind of banked the fire. His stew had started to kind of bubble on one side. He didn't want it to burn. It would taste nasty, so he turned the bucket around and kind of jostled it so the stew would warm up evenly all throughout. And he was standing there getting drier and drier, enjoying thinking about how the food was going to taste. The rocking chair still in the corner. Then the rocking chair stopped rocking. And that creepy quiet came back. With it also came another voice down the chimney, saying, while Jack watched the fireplace, down the chimney slid, boom, the trunk of a body. It had no head. It had no arms. It had no legs. It had a belly button the size of a basketball. An Audi. with ashes and soot and grease and grime. While Jack watched, it laid over on its side, and it rolled out of the fireplace. Then it stood up on the end, right next to him in front of the fireplace. He looked at it and said, "Don't you bother my stew." It didn't say a word. It just spun around like a top. Boogity, 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 boogity. Slinging off the ashes and soot from the chimney. Then it laid back down on its side, and it rolled across the room. Bada-boom, 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 bouncing over the belly button. Bada-boom, bada-boom, till it got to the rocking chair. When it got to the rocking chair, it bounced up on the end. Then it bounced up on the legs, wiggled around till it was all just right, and then leaned back into the chair. And the chair kept rocking back and forth. Gotta be neighborly, I guess. Well, his food was just about done cooking. And by now, he was pretty much dried out, except for some nervous moisture. And he was starting to think of where he might find something to dish up the food. The fire was nice. The rocking chair was still going in the corner. But before he could figure out where he might find something to eat his food out of, the quiet came back. And again, another voice came down the chimney to say, "I'm gonna fall." I'm gonna fall. Save me! Say anything else, please. And while he watched, the chimney, boom, boom, down the chimney came two long, dangly arms, with big, knobby elbows and stringy, dangly fingers, long, grubby nails, and the arms were standing on those hands like they were feet. And while Jack watched, boom, boom, the arms hooked onto each other where they should have been shoulders. Then using the hands for feet, shoop, boom, the arms stepped out of the fireplace, stood right next to Jack. He looked at the arms and said, "Don't you step in my stew." The arms didn't say anything. They just jumped up and down, boop, 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 till they shook the ashes and soot from the fireplace off. Then walking on the hands for feet, bump, 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 they went over to the rocking chair. They unhooked from each other, attached themselves, scoop, scoop, to the shoulders of the headless thing in the rocking chair, and then the hairy, headless, creepy thing jumped up out of the rocking chair, knocked the rocking chair over, went around the room, yanking things up, pushing things over, dragging things to the side, rooting around like a hog digging for something, rooting around, pulling the books off the shelves. Jack looked at it and said, "You better watch out. You're going to spill my stew." It said nothing back. It just kept rooting around. Finally, Jack said, "What in the world are you hunting for?" The thing stopped, turned, and faced him, and the voice said, "My head." "Well, where was it last time you saw it?" Jack said, and the headless thing replied, "In the cellar." He pointed to a door. Jack went over and he opened the door. The stairs went down into the dark. He said, "I'll get your head for you first thing in the morning." The thing walked over to the fireplace. Boom, boom, boom. Reached out and yanked off its longest finger. Stuck that finger down into the fireplace, and the end of the finger lit up like a torch. The thing stepped over by Jack. Boom, boom. and handed him the finger. "Thank you," said Jack. In the light of the flame on the end of the finger, he could see the stairs, and so he made his way down the stairs. "It smells like a 100-year-old cat box down here. Oh, dirt floor, cobwebs." Thump! As he was looking around in the cellar down there, his foot hit something. He looked down. Some lazy bum. They mopped the floor, and they didn't hang the mop. They just threw the mop down the stairs. There's no handle on the mop head, but there's a nose. He realized. He reached down and he grabbed a handful of the hair. He held it up and he climbed the stairs. And the thing was waiting when Jack got to the top of the stairs. He said, "Is this the one you lost?" The thing reached out with his long, gangly fingers, wrapped them around the head, plucked the head out of Jack's hands, stuck the head on his shoulders, twisted until it was on just right, and then the thing's eyes opened and looked at Jack. Jack said, "Here." Blew the flame out, gave the thing back his finger. The thing took his finger, jammed it back on, and then the thing's eyes kind of glowed inside, and it spoke, "I've been looking around this old place for more than 100 years. Everyone but you's run away. You're the only one to stay and help me get myself together. So you get the reward. Go down to the bottom of the cellar stairs and dig in the dirt. There you'll find a treasure so big it'll take you more than a lifetime to spend it. It's my gift to you for helping me get ahead." Just that quick, boom, the thing was gone. Jack said, "Yes, I'm going down there and get that treasure." First thing in the morning. Well, he shut the cellar door. And he found a candle up on the mantle. He lit the candle, found his way back into the kitchen, got up, opened a spoon, and went back and sat down, had some of that stew, and then he found a closet with pillows and blankets. He pulled the couch up close enough to the fire so he could get the warmth out of the fireplace, banked the fire, had a good night's sleep. The next morning, the storm had gone away, and the sunlight shining in through the windows, including the cellar windows. He opened the door, went down underneath the cellar stairs. He found the shovel, so he went to dig, and it shoom, 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 thump, thump. Thump, thump, thump. Huh. He found a treasure so big it would take a lifetime to spend it. The very first thing he did was keep his promise. Promises are important. We've got to make ones we can keep. And he did. He sent for his mother to live with him in that big house on the hill. Last I heard, they were still living up there and doing right well. And that's a story. That's a story. Is it true inside of you? It's a story that might go to show. Any of us might have to venture into a dark, scary place to get help or to give help if anybody ever has kind of lost their head. It's a story called Jack and the Haunted House.